In this video, I'm going to share 5 tips for beginners that are wanting to learn video in 2025. These are things that I've learned over the years as I've been a content creator, and it's, in my opinion, some of the most important things to know when you're getting started. Let's talk about it. The first tip is investing in the right gear. There's so much camera gear out there nowadays, and almost every brand is presenting really good options today in 2025. Camera technology has grown tremendously even from when I've started, and so you can go out and get a really decent camera for a beginner now from all kinds of price ranges, all kinds of brands, etc. If I was purchasing a beginner camera in 2025, there's 2 main things that I would look for if you're just starting out. So at this point, we're not talking about intermediate level, we're not talking about pro level, we're talking about your beginner. You've been making some videos maybe on your iPhone. You think, hey, I'm interested in kind of taking this a little bit further, but you don't have a lot of money right now. You need to start with a small budget. You want to get an actual camera. These are 2 things that I would look for in a camera if I was in that situation. Number 1, I want it to have 4K at 24 frames per second. The reason being, 4K has really become the standard, especially in 2025. 1080p still looks great. You can still get some really awesome looking videos if you have a camera that does really good 1080p. But if I was starting out, I would look for a camera that at least has 4K for 24 frames per second. The second main thing I would look for in this beginner camera is going to be an audio input. We want to make sure that, yes, we're getting really good video, but we want to make sure that we have an audio jack so that we can get really good audio. Audio is half of the viewing experience. So if it was me, I would find a really good mirrorless camera that's either full frame or APS-C from whichever camera brand that you would like to try out. I'm a big Sony person, but Canon has some really good options for beginners. I know there's like the R10. I'm not sure of all the model names for Canon, but I know for Sony, there's like the A6400. That's a little bit of an older model, but still great, has 4K, has an audio input. There's the newer A6700 that they came out with. There's so many different options, especially depending on the range of your budget and how much that you're able to pay up front. If you have a little bit extra money and you want to get a little bit higher up than just a beginner level, I love the Sony A7C II. This is a full frame mirrorless camera. It's in a super compact body, has an audio input, and has a ton of great features. But find whatever camera works for you that's within your budget, has good 4K, has an audio input, and this will give you something to get started with. Now next, and I would almost say more importantly, you need to invest in a good lens. It's a much smarter choice to pay more money to invest in a better lens than it is to invest in a better camera body, especially when you're first starting out. You need to invest in a lens that at least has a maximum aperture of f2.8. This will make sure that you can shoot in a lot of lighting scenarios, even a little bit of low light. You can get some blurry background, make sure that your shots look really nice. And there are some really good affordable options for lenses. You don't have to buy the most expensive line of lenses for your camera when you're first starting out. I'm shooting this video on the Sigma 24-70 f2.8. It's a really good option. You can find them used for a good price, but there's also cheaper options than that. You can check out Sigma, you can check out Tamron, you can check out Viltrox. Different third-party brands of lenses a lot of times are a little bit more affordable than the name brand, but they still produce great looking images if you get a lens that has a maximum aperture of at least f2.8. So we want a camera that shoots 4K and has an audio input, and we want to get a good lens with an aperture of at least f2.8. Once you have some good gear to start with, then we can move on to our next tip, which is basic camera settings. For video, there's some really basic camera settings that you want to be able to understand when you're first starting out. The first setting is going to be your overall image exposure, which is comprised of 3 different settings that make up the overall exposure or brightness of your image. First up, we're going to have shutter speed, and this is going to be the speed at which your shutter opens and closes to capture movement. And in video, this is going to have a huge impact on motion blur and how our eyes perceive things that are moving. The best practice for video is to always keep your shutter speed at double your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, you would want to make sure that your shutter speed is always at 1/48, or if your camera doesn't have specific shutter speed settings, you can do 1/50. This is going to ensure that your motion blur looks the most natural, and objects that are moving in your scene, such as me waving my hand, is going to look really natural. The second setting in the exposure triangle is going to be aperture. Aperture is basically the iris of your lens that opens and closes to allow in more light or less light into your image while you're filming a video. It also affects the depth of field. So the more open you have your aperture, say at an f2.8, the blurrier the background will be. There are a lot of different scenarios and different ways that you would use aperture, but for the most part, I leave my aperture on like f2.8 or the lowest that it will go on whatever lens that I'm using. This just ensures that I'm getting the most light that I can into my camera sensor, and I'm getting the nice blurry background that we all like. The third setting in the exposure triangle is ISO, and this is basically just tracking the sensitivity of your camera sensor to light. And there are several different ways to think about ISO. When you're doing video, if you're shooting in a RAW or a log format, you probably most of the time want to make sure that your ISO is set at your camera's base ISO. Some cameras have dual native ISOs, some only have one. It just really depends on the model of your camera. But if you're shooting in like a standard pictured profile that's not log, it's not RAW, it's just a regular picture profile in your camera, you probably want to keep your ISO as low as possible, because the more that you increase your ISO, the more grain or noise that you add into the image. You're basically turning up the brightness of your image digitally inside your camera, which means that it can only go so far before it kind of starts to fall apart and not be as clear, clean, and precise. So those are the three settings that make up the exposure triangle. All three of these work together to kind of give you the overall exposure of your image. 99% of the time, I always have my shutter speed at 1/50 because I'm shooting at 24 frames per second. I always have my aperture set as low as the lens will go, usually like 2.8, or if I have a prime lens or something, 1.8, 1.4, something like that. And I always have my ISO set to my base ISO because I'm shooting in S-Log3, which is like 800. And you can adjust all of these settings based on the lighting in your scene and what you're trying to film. There's also one other setting that's super important to understand when you're first starting out, and that is white balance. White balance is a basic setting to correct how the colors appear in your image, whether they're really warm or they're really cool. Another way to think about it is how to balance the white things in your image, something that is the color white. Is white really a color? Or is it the one that's absent of all color? Anyway, white balance is the setting that can help a white shirt look white if you have it set correctly depending on the lighting in your scene. For example, here in my studio, I'm being lit by a key light that is at 5,000 Kelvin. And Kelvin is just a measurement for the color temperature of light. So I made sure to set my camera's white balance at 5,000 Kelvin so that this color temperature would look correct. But it's not always just the setting to make white things look white. Sometimes it depends on what kind of temperature and what kind of lighting is in the scene. For example, if you're shooting at sunset and there's that beautiful orange glow, you wouldn't want to set your white balance so that everything looks white, because then the colors would be shifted really weird and it would look kind of blue in some areas. You want the image to look warm and golden because that's what it looks like in person. So white balance is something that's not necessarily about making the whites look white. It's about matching the color temperature or giving off the color that you want from your image. So exposure and white balance are some of the most important camera settings when you're first learning how to shoot video. There are a whole bunch of other settings, but this is just an overview of the basics. The next tip is learning how to get good audio. So after you've gotten the right gear, you've got a good looking image, you've learned how to do some basic camera settings, the next thing is we need to be able to get good audio. And what I would recommend for this when you're first starting out, there are tons of different kinds of mics that you can get. There's on-camera mics, there's shotgun mics, there's boom mics, there's condenser mics, there's podcast mics, there's wireless mics, there's lavalier mics, there's all kinds of mics. But if you're first starting out, I would recommend getting wireless mics, such as the Hollyland Lark M2s or the DJI mic. I have the mic 1s here. These wireless mics are great because you can just stick the transmitter on your camera, plug it into the little audio jack on the side, and then you have your microphone that you can wear, you can hold, put wherever you need to be able to get that good audio. I'm using a wireless mic right now. This is the Lark M2. I have the little transmitter on top of my camera plugged in, and I'm getting really good audio without having to run any cables like long distance. I'm not having to boom in a microphone over my head. This is just a quick and easy way to get really good audio. One of the only things that you need to worry about is plugging it in. Make sure that you have your audio levels set to where they're not peaking setting, and you're good to go. So if I was just starting out and I wanted to get some really decent audio, I would invest in either the DJI Mic 1s, the Mic 2s, you have the Hollyland Mark 2s, there's a DJI Mic Mini out now, there's Rode wireless mics, there's tons of different options and brands at really good affordable prices. So that would be my third tip, is just making sure, start somewhere on getting good audio. And it really depends on what you're gonna be filming. If you're not going to be filming someone talking, then it might make more sense for you to start out with just a little on-camera mic to pick up ambient noises around your camera. So in that case, I would recommend an on-camera mic instead of a wireless mic system. But these are just suggestions for you to be able to get started with something that's easy, quick, and gets you good audio in a really fast way. The fourth tip is basic video editing skills. I personally recommend starting with free software like DaVinci Resolve, which is super easy to use, and you can do so much just with the free version of the software. And if you're really ready to take it to the next level, you can always just purchase the studio version of the software for a one-time fee. I started out on Adobe Premiere Pro, and I used that for like the first couple of years on my video journey. And it's a great video editing software. But for me, it was a little bit more complicated to learn up front. But then when I switched to DaVinci Resolve, it seemed to be a lot easier to understand. So that's why I would recommend it for beginners, because it also is free when you first start out. So here are a few beginner editing tips. I like to spend most of my time in the edit page of DaVinci Resolve, but it has all of the pages laid out in a way that you could go page by page and use their process that's already kind of laid out if you want to. For example, this beginning page is your media page where you could put all your clips in, see what you've got, and watch through all of your footage. Then you've got the cut page where you can come in and chop up just the parts of the clips that you want to use. Then you can put them all in the edit page, which is I kind of think of as the timeline page. I automatically just start on this page because I like the way it's laid out and it makes sense to me. And that's just how I started doing it, and it's just how I've done it since I started. You can open up, make sure you just drop your files right into the media bin. You can play through clips here in the media player. Once you're watching through your clip and you want to select in and out points, you can easily just hit I for an in point, scrub to where you want to end it, and you can click O for an out point. Now you can either drag in the whole clip, or you can drag in just the clip, or you can drag in just the audio from that section that you selected. So we can pull our whole clip here onto the timeline. You can expand the audio clip down to be able to see the waveforms. Another really useful keyboard shortcut, you can press letter B for the blade tool, and that will let you just cut that clip at whatever point you want to. Then you can delete the section that you don't want. And if you do something you want to undo it, you can just do Command Z. This is for Mac, obviously. It's very similar for PC computers. You can come back, spacebar to play your clip, spacebar to pause it. You can always come up, and if you don't see this panel here on the right-hand side, you can click Inspector, and that will make all of your tools available. So you've got audio tools, you can turn the volume up and down. You've got video tools where you can crop in, you can adjust the position. If we move to the color page, you can color grade your footage or make minor adjustments here on your clips. So you'll see over here that we have nodes, and this is how we can color grade and layer what all adjustments and changes we're making to the footage as we color grade. There's a lot of tools and a lot of information in the color page, but when you're just starting out, it's easy to just understand some basic settings that you can change. I shot this footage in log, so I'm just gonna quickly convert that to Rec 709. So to do that, I'm just going to add a node, which is the keyboard shortcut Option S for Mac. I'm just going to throw on a quick LUT. And now I'm just gonna show you some really basic adjustments that you can make in the color page. Let's come over here to our color wheels, and here you can access just a lot of really basic settings to make adjustments to your footage. You've got contrast, where you can just immediately add or take away some contrast. You've got saturation down here at the bottom. If you've got your color temperature a little bit wrong, you can change that to make it more cool or to warm it up if you needed to. You can also adjust the green and magenta tint if your lighting looked a little bit weird, and you can easily use these three wheels to adjust your exposure. Gain is your highlights, gamma is your midtones, and lift is your shadows. So that's just a few really simple, basic, easy settings in the color page just so that you know what they do and how they work. Then when you're ready to export your video, you just go to the export page, name your file, save it to somewhere on your computer, click add to render queue, and then come over here and click render all. And this will export your video and save it to the file you selected on your computer. When you're starting a new project, it's really good to make sure that you have some basic settings correct in the software. So you can come down here and click this little gear icon to display the settings. You want to make sure that whichever resolution you shot in is selected here. And here's also a little tip. Even if you shot in 1080p, you can put your project in 4K and you can export at 4K so that when you upload to different social media platforms, it will give it a little bit more resolution because you're putting in the metadata and the coding behind the video file saying that it's a 4K file. So the platforms will treat it as though it were a 4K file and help it look just a little bit more high quality. So you can go in here and make sure that these settings are all good and that your frame rate is what you shot it at. That's just a small look at what all you can do in editing. There is so much more to learn about editing, but that's just a few basics just to get you started. Tip number 5 is understanding the basics of good lighting. And with lighting, you can start really simple. Just invest in a good key light and just throw a lamp in the background of your video. This will immediately elevate the quality of your video when you have good lighting. This is an example of just a key light lighting me, and I have a lamp in this corner. This is a very easy 2-light setup. You probably already have lamps at your house, so you can just literally invest in buying one light that will be good as a key light. You just want to make sure that you're able to have some diffusion or some kind of material that the light shines through so that it's soft and pleasing on your face. You can even do this by buying a budget-friendly light and shooting it through like a 5-in-1 reflector where it has that white diffusion piece in the middle. Or you could even hang like a white curtain that's kind of sheer and you can see through it a little bit. That will add diffusion to the light that you're shining through it and make it a softer key light on you. There are so many budget light options that will be great for you to use as your first key light. If you are a beginner wanting to start out video in 2025, these are the 5 tips that I recommend when you're first getting started. Make sure you invest in the right gear, learn basic camera settings, learn how to get good audio, practice basic editing skills, and understand the basic principles of lighting. These 5 things will jumpstart your journey into becoming a videographer. If you found this video helpful, be sure to check out some of the other videos on my channel, such as this video right here about a cool Sony camera feature.